Hi, it's Jill Sprott here with this week's Storytellers feature from Two Peas in a Bucket. Pie charts probably bring to mind math problems more than they do stories, but they really can speak volumes. In this video, I'll share how I included a series of pie charts on a layout that elevates them from mere design elements to a form of documentation. Sure, they represent data, but collectively, they also offer a snapshot of a life story in progress. This layout focuses on my daughter, who isn't just the subject of the layout, but the storyteller as well. I sat with her, having put together a few notes about possible pie charts to include on a layout, and she, without bribery, provided the details. Fresh off the SAT, she even made sure that each chart equated to 100%. I then grabbed my handy-dandy circle cutter and mat and cut a series of 3.5-inch circles to include on the layout, varying the colors and patterns. I took my color cues from the March mood board at Two Peas in a Bucket, with its abundance of greens and blues and a little color contrast thrown in. I prepped the craft cardstock by drawing a series of circles on it, using one of the circles that I had just cut out as a guide. I liked the idea of a looser, less precise line peeking out from under my pie charts, so after tracing each circle as a basic foundation, I went over the trace circle again a few times by hand, deliberately creating an irregularity that I was hoping beyond hope would later convert to artsy-craftsy charm. Based on the responses that my daughter had given me earlier, I created a rough sketch of how each pie chart should look on the page. That way I'd have a guide as I pieced together the charts. And piece them together I did, bit by bit, trimming the already cut circles to create pieces of the pie that would equate to the percentages that were designated by my daughter during our earlier conversations. I varied colors and patterns while sticking to the basic mood board color scheme, ensuring that each piece would appear distinct from the others while also working harmoniously with them. When choosing patterns, I aim for those that would work well placed in any direction on the chart, or for those that related in some way to the category that they depicted. For instance, the chart that I'm piecing together here represents my daughter's internet behavior, and that hashtag pattern represents Twitter. Another reason for choosing some patterns here was their ability to get funky. A basic white piece is enlivened with a few swipes from an ink dauber. At this point, you've probably realized it. This is an awesome way to use the scraps in your stash. I repeated this process with the other 3 charts, referring to my sketch, trimming the pieces, and adhering them over and over and over. You'll notice that I'm not a believer in perfection and precision. Mostly I'm just eyeballing the pieces as I trim them. That's fine. Again, this may look like math, but it's really about storytelling. Go with the flow and trust that it'll all come together eventually. After piecing together the pie charts, I noticed that the outlines of the circles had disappeared somewhat, and so I traced around them a few times with a black pen to make the outlines more pronounced. I then filled in the spaces with blue, green, and gold watercolor pencils. A brush, lightly dipped in water, can transform pencil to paint. I love the effect. I then grabbed my trusty ink dauber and swiped it a few times around the outside of the circles. I like this approach because it brings continuity to the layout. Each one of the circles has a little bit of ink on it, and it makes it something that it shares in common with the other circles. On to the journaling. Although in the case of this layout, it's not really conventional journaling. It's more like labeling as journaling. Every pie chart needs a title, and this is where these labels from Evalicious come in handy. I placed double-stick tape on the back of each label and ran them through the printer. I placed them adjacent to their accompanying pie charts and then headed for my sewing machine. I stitched not only the labels, but also around each circle multiple times as well. As I mentioned, the journaling on a page like this is not exactly conventional. Instead of long, descriptive sentences, there are short, concise labels to identify each pie in the chart. Based on the information that my daughter had given me, I typed up a list and printed it on cardstock, and then trimmed each piece and added it to the corresponding section of the chart. Piece by piece, label by label, a clearer sense of her story began to emerge. That story is a mix of realism and comedy. I depicted what's been going on in her life and what's been on her mind, but did so through faux academic language, the language of pie charts. One chart is titled Repetitive Internet Behaviors, and another, Expenditure of Fangirling Energies. As we were generating ideas for the charts, my daughter wisely said, "You can't just put life in a pie chart, it keeps changing." And she's right. This layout is just a glimpse of a work in progress. This made choosing a title for the layout somewhat tricky. Using these chipboard alphabets from October afternoon, I spelled out two words, in sum. Pie charts represent parts of a whole. My daughter may be the sum of her parts, but these are just a few parts of her identity depicted here. At this point, the layout was starting to feel nearly finished to me. However, as I looked at it, I realized that a viewer might be confused about which label belongs to which chart, and so I added some stickers and some clips from Evilicious to help to guide the eye. These additions also lend some texture and dimension to the layout. And there you have it. In sum, the final layout. Pie charts really are a worthwhile addition to your storytelling toolkit. Although I love the product, this page, the best part of the project was the process, working alongside my daughter to connect part to whole. Thanks for joining me for this week's Storytellers.